Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our NCAT Firm Research Implementation Web Series. My name is Travis Ballbeck. I'm the training manager here at NCAT, and I'm excited for this month's edition, which is asphalt use for sports courts, trails, and other non-traditional applications. It's a really unique way that we can use asphalt, but another critical way that we can serve our communities through asphalt. So this week we have with us, as always, Dr. Buzz Powell. He's gonna not only welcome us to the concept, but he's also going to be our research person for today's meeting. And then we're also joined today by Scott Spano. So I'll go ahead and jump into things here. So Buzz Powell's worked for the Alabama DOT for 12 years, in the private sector for 2 years before becoming NCAT's first test track manager in 1999. He served as NCAT's associate director and an Auburn University research professor. And Buzz is now the technical director for the Asphalt Pavement Alliance. Our special guest with us today is Scott Spano from Intercounty Paving Company. IPC is a company with a long-standing, rich legacy that dates back to 1950, when Scott's father George and his uncle Mike started the company. Over the years, Intercounty Paving has been involved from its humble beginnings to its modern, cutting-edge paving company. Since 1980, Scott has had the privilege of steering Intercounty Paving Company to new heights, working alongside his wife and partner, Trish. Today, Scott is proud that his son, Tyler, works with him every day, and Tyler embodies the values that define Intercounty Paving. Scott is glad to be here today with us and share his story and expertise with all of you. So with that, I'm going to remind everybody, please mute yourself. Please hold all your questions. We'll throw them in the chat box. Once we hear from Buzz and we hear from Scott, then we will address any questions that we have time for. Buzz, take it away.
Well, thanks, Travis. And I see Scott there. So Scott, we appreciate you joining us. It's good to be here. And this I think is one of those webinars that's going to be very valuable to have in our webinar archive, Travis, and have it so that people can go back and refer to it. The use of sports courts and trails and things like that. That's a growing part of the asphalt world, and the reason why I'm excited about this topic is it's Scott and I talked about this when we were talking about planning for this webinar. If you're a company that has done traditional asphalt paving on roads, there are some things that you need to be aware of before you just sort of jump into this type of work. And that's the reason why I'm excited to be with everybody today, and why we appreciate Scott participating the way that he is. So we do these every month, and if you want to jump in, if this is your first webinar, you can use the same QR code to register for these on a monthly basis. That's the QR code on that screen there. If you want to take a picture of it or do a screen grab of it. Every month we come in and I typically provide some background. We have a PI, researcher type person talk about research. We like to have someone come in from from actual practice to discuss deployment, and then I come back at the very end and I kind of pull everything together with some takeaways. This presentation is a little bit different, and this is the reason why I was so excited to have Scott be involved today. Because on the background side, most of the webinars that we do all of them so far have been related to research done at the NCAT pavement test track here at the National Center for Asphalt Technology. As Travis said, I've been very blessed I was blessed to work at the track for over 24 years and then be with the DOT for 12 years prior to that. But sports courts is different. We've never built a sport court at the test track. We do work for state DOTs, for FHWA, for private sector clients. We do pavement preservation research that might be very relevant to cities and counties, but we've not done any sport court work. So I'm now in my position with Asphalt Pavement Alliance. I was asked to do a sort of a deep dive on this topic and recently put together a presentation on the topic. And so that's why we're doing this webinar, is because very recently I did a sport courts presentation and trails presentation for the New Jersey Asphalt Pavement Association. So before, I guess, as we get into the background, why are we talking about this? Well, sports courts and trails, they're growing in popularity, and if you don't know anything at all about this, think pickleball courts. There's pickleball courts that are springing up really all over the country. Asphalt is the preferred surface. It's the best material to build with, and there's some reasons for that. There are orthopedic benefits from reduced stress from the flexible surface that you get from asphalts. You get excellent adhesion and longevity when you use asphalt with many of the color coatings that are used. And you have excellent weather resilience, hot versus cold, dry versus wet, really good seasonal survivability with these surfaces. They're durable, economical, and they're easy for owners to maintain. And the big question is, and this is really why I got into this. If you're a contractor who's been doing parking lots or been doing roads, whether they're high traffic roads or low traffic roads, how do you bid and build these projects to meet the expectations of the owner so that it's not going to be a kind of a closeout and acceptance nightmare and a maintenance nightmare? So that's really where all this came from, and it's why we so appreciate Scott being here with us today to share his experience. So when I put this presentation together for New Jersey, I dipped into the experience of others. Deb Swerman had did a webinar in the past for the Asphalt Pavement Alliance. Tim Murphy had done a sport courts webinar for Napa. Mike Skinner out in Colorado had done one for Bike Pass, and then my previous director the current director at NCAT, Randy West, he did a presentation at the ASBA association meeting. And so I took all this information together, used it as reference material, kind of pulled out what I thought was the high points, and that's what I used to make the New Jersey presentation. And then what I'm going to share with you in my part today really is a stripped down version of that. So that is the background, and the main initial point here is that roadway surfaces are not equal in any way to sport surfaces. It's really a completely different type of work, and that's the reason why it's really important that we meet today to talk about this topic. So ASBA is the American Sports Builders Association, and they have a really good website with resources at sportsbuilders.org. If you want to learn more about what will be required of you in terms of a specification to build these types of facilities, if you go to sportsbuilders.org, you can actually download a specification and see information about specific products and such. So what's different about these facilities? Well, surface tolerance and macro texture are really key things. And surface tolerance really is what we're trying to do to avoid bird baths and depressions that really create functional problems on these surfaces. Macro texture is essentially the roughness that you feel on the surface of asphalt when you run your hand over it. So high-speed roadways tend to have higher macro texture. Parking lots have lower macro texture. Sports courts are low macro texture, meaning they're smaller, finer mixes. Heavy vehicle loading is not the design criteria for sports facilities, unlike roads. Resistance to cracking is a primary consideration with these surfaces. The materials and the mix design that are used for these, you have to consider these differences. You don't just call if you're a paver and you're working on one of these, you don't just call a plant and say, hey, what kind of mix are you running today? Send me so many tons. You have to have the right kind of mix. And I think Scott is going to have a few things to say about that when it's his turn to speak. It's a good idea to use a DOT approved mix producer, just because when they are DOT approved, they have to have a QC plan. They have to have the plant inspected. They have to be credentialed. And of course, we encourage you to use a SAPA member, a State Asphalt Pavement Association member, and there needs to be a QC plan in place to make sure that what is the mix that you buy meets your expectations. And then one of the key things for success here is you need to have a plant and a paving crew with project specific experience. In other words, if you're going to build a sport court, it's a good idea to do some research to find someone with a resume and a specialty in this area, like Scott's company has, and make sure you don't just do this through some kind of an open competitive process where you don't check the credentials of the crew that you're going to use to build it. You need to make sure you have someone who's proven that they can do a good job with this. So the Sports Builders Association has an established set of mixed design criteria. These are Marshall mixes based on the specification that I looked up, and there's a VMA requirement. Essentially, it's just saying we want this to be a healthy mix. It's a 3.5% air voids mix, has a Marshall stability and flow requirement. Even has a TSR requirement on it to make sure that it's got good resistance to moisture damage. So these are all criteria that are familiar to those of us who do roads and parking lots and those kinds of structures. These are specifications that are just intended to make sure that the mix that you buy is going to be a healthy mix. So aggregate selection, you need to use local sources on the agency's approved list, your local agency's approved list. Typically, the specifications, for these types of projects say no deleterious materials, and that's stuff like shale, like pyrite, like clay balls, and you'll see why that's important as we go through this presentation. No slags. You don't want metallic materials. You don't, the variable gravity is an issue, and the absorptive nature of the materials can be a challenge. But the main thing is just the metallic nature, and that's so that you don't get any rust stains on the final surface. About half of the mix is sand size stockpiles. Typically, it's mostly crushed, and that's really because of the size of the mix. Natural sand in this mix needs to be limited to 20%. So you don't need to have more than 20% natural sand in the mix. And that's mainly because of the moisture sensitivity of those materials and the mixed tenderness issues that can lead to. And you can make up to 15% wrap work as long as it's processed minus a half and it fits the gradation of the mix that is being produced, as long as the wrap does not have any deleterious materials or slag. So essentially, if you've got a wrap that it has the same material limits as the virgin stockpiles, then you can typically use up to 15% in this mix. But I would be very cautious about that, depending on how much experience you have with the mix and with the material. So just kind of I wanted to go through a list of materials that depending on your jurisdiction you may or may not use in asphalt where you're paving parking lots or paving roads. For sport court mixes, you're not going to want to use any recycled asphalt shingles, and that recycled asphalt shingles have a tendency to I've described the process of flash stiffening. As the mix cools, the mix can get really, really stiff with asphalt shingles, depending on how it's produced and what kind of products are used complementary products might be used with it. So it's a good idea not to use asphalt shingles. You don't need polymer modified binder for these mixes because, again, they're not supporting heavy loading. Ground tire rubber is optional. You might have a client that says, hey, I want to use rubber in my mix because they might believe there's a flexibility benefit, or they might feel there's an environmental reason why it's a good idea to include it. So you can use it. You don't need fibers for these mixes, either cellulose fibers or the high strength aramid fibers. Again, this is not a heavy loaded mix, so you don't need to really spend money on those types of additives. I personally would recommend you use a warm mix additive, and the reason why I would do that if I was doing this job, just based on what I know about about this type of work. The warm mix additive is going to make hand work easier. It's going to give you better workability, and it's going to get you protection for moisture damage. So there's a lot of reasons why warm mix is a good idea. You're not talking about a lot of tons required for this work, so the cost of that is not going to be really high. Anti-strip additives as needed based on TSR results, noting that many warm mix additives are also liquid anti-strips. And then people often ask about recycled plastic, just because we want to be sustainable, we want to be good stewards, and so there's a lot of desire to use things like recycled plastics. And the best thing that I can tell you at this point in time is it's way too early to tell. There are some products out there that that have the potential to work, but you want to be careful. First of all, if you're buying a plastic additive, know what percentage of the additive is actually recycled plastic and what percentage might be a virgin plastic or some other type of polymer. And if it's 100% recycled plastic, you just should be very cautious with the impact that it's going to have on mix quality, on workability and compactability and all those kinds of issues. So a typical sports court design, you need to, my advice to you, if you're a paving contractor and you're doing the foundation, you're doing the base, and then you're also going to do the paving, that's always a different case, because your responsibility is quality for the entire job. But I always caution people, if you're just an asphalt contractor and somebody else is doing the foundation, make sure you go out there and verify the grade before you mobilize. Otherwise, you might move a lot of equipment onto the job and spend a whole bunch of money, and then find out that there's not a good tolerance on the base before you start. And I'm sure Scott may have some information to share about that. The lower layer of asphalt, a typical 10-foot tolerance requirement is 1/4 of an inch over 10 feet, and that's with just a 10-foot aluminum straight edge, no more than 1/4 of an inch of deviation. And then the upper layer of asphalt, it's a tighter requirement. It's 1/8 of an inch over 10 feet with a 10-foot aluminum straight edge, and that's so that you don't end up with any big surface deviation, surface anomalies that affect the use of the court. And then of course you have a playing surface on top of that might be some type of a coating. Before you apply a coating, you allow a month for curing, and I think that's similar to doing roadway work and maybe waiting to apply thermoplastic to make sure that some of the lighter components of the asphalt have had an opportunity to sort of work their way out, so that the mix is not changing significantly. Grade control is the big thing with these types of projects, and this is something, even though my practice has been mainly limited to at least over the last few decades to the NCAT pavement test track, grade control is a really important thing to us, because we when we are doing research thickness, we need to build pavements to precise thickness, and then we need to have smoothness that's very, very good, so that roughness doesn't confound the outcomes of our experiment. So I'm very sensitive to the grade control issues, but sport courts are a whole new thing, and it's because of that 1/8 of an inch tolerance over 10 feet with a straight edge. You have to make sure that you have this under control. And there actually is a big misconception out there. I think, people think, well, with RTK GPS, I can easily go out there and use that and set up and control my jobs. And RTK GPS will do a really good job of getting you an X and a Y for grade control, but it does not do an adequate job of getting you a Z, getting you an elevation. You got to have lasers out there to get elevation. And you can rough grade jobs with GPS, but you better final grade jobs with lasers to make sure the elevation is precise. And if you don't do that, then you run the risk of having a job that is not going to meet the needs of the client, and then it's going to be something you're going to have to come back on. There's lots of options now for for grade control for the 3D grade control systems. You can buy pavers if you're doing a mill and a pave. You've got the option for 3D grade control on mill machines and pavers. And then there's aftermarket hardware as well. So when you buy new iron, you can buy it already equipped, or you can retrofit it from several different manufacturers. And this is the reason why grade control is really important. If you end up with low spots out there, you're going to have water ponding, and then you're going to have cracking issues that are going to be associated with that, and use issues that are associated with that. So you really want to make sure that the surface is as true as possible, and make sure that it drains as it's designed to drain when it does experience rainfall. Cracking is something that we work really hard with these surfaces to control. And it's not uncommon to see these types of cracks on sport courts. And they're often affiliated with the striping. You got extreme temperature change is typically the initiator of these types of cracks. You have big thermal differential under the reflective striping. In other words, the blue and the green and the red has a very different temperature than the striping that is applied to it. The white stripes reflect heat, and the darker colors absorb heat. So there's big thermal differentials under the reflective striping. And then you have aging and oxidation differentials under the surface coating. So there's a lot of reasons why cracking does occur, and we need to have a plan to, when you build these surfaces, you need to have a plan to delay the onset of cracking as much as possible. And then maybe when you resurface these, you have to have a plan to mitigate and control future cracking. Blisters is also something that you really want to avoid with these surfaces. You can build a really nice surface and be very proud of it. Perfect grade control and everything. And if you have something like this happen, that can really put a dark cloud over a project. And this happens when you have moisture trapped in the asphalt, either within it or underneath it. And this can be an issue when you have thermal gradients. The hotter temperatures are at the surface in the daytime, so it can create pretty significant thermal gradients. At really high temperatures, when those gradients do occur, asphalt is at a lower tensile strength when it's at higher temperatures. And then you have these blisters occur when vapor pressure exceeds the tensile strength of the asphalt. So you have water trapped in there. It gets hot. You have vapor pressure build up, and then when it exceeds the strength of the asphalt, you have these blisters occur, and then you can have delamination occur as well. Staining is also a negative. This is one of the reasons for the deleterious material limitations. You want to make sure you don't have any metallic or slag material in these courts. Pyrite minerals, friable clay balls, metals, and slag. Those all can create stains, and when you have this really nice expensive surface, you certainly don't want to see those types of stains. Bike paths and trails are, we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about those because they're pretty similar to roadways in a lot of ways. You can use the ASHTO design for pavements and shoulders with drainage and everything. You can use the same types of design principles for bike paths and trails. You're typically looking at a minimum total asphalt thickness of 3 inches, probably 2 lifts, a minimum crushed ag base thickness of maybe 6 inches. And then the big concern that you have there is weeds and roots, and then shoulder and subgrade failures, especially out near the edge of the pavement. You have to approach this sort of like a low volume roadway, and then just make sure you do a really good job with the design and with the buildup. In terms of trails and bike paths and things, one of the online resources that I really advocate for, and I encourage you to do a screenshot of this if you're interested in it, but the USDA has a web soil survey that you can get to. It's free on the internet, and you can look up soil types. You can investigate groundwater conditions, drainage concerns. There's even a tool in here where you can say, okay, you can box out an area and you can say, I want to build a bike path in this area, or I want to build, some specific type of structure in this area. What general guidance would you recommend for me based on the soil and the water conditions on this site? And so it's a great tool for doing preliminary design work. And I actually use this, I teach a course in pavement forensics. I did a pavement forensics educational session at World of Asphalt. And this is a great website to use for either design purposes or for forensic purposes. So having said all that, now I'm gonna hopefully hand off here to Scott Spano with Intercounty Paving, and this is just a kind of a transition slide for me where I went to their website and it talks about the different type of work that they do, and then one of the specific services that they provide is sports, basketball and tennis court construction.
Just wanted to talk. We are a commercial paving contractor. We do a lot of municipal roads and condos and developments and stuff like that. And as you were saying, a lot of this can apply and a lot of it doesn't. And we've done quite a few tennis courts and basketball courts, but now like the biggest rage is these pickleball courts, which are a little smaller, and then also we've been involved with turning, like you can make I believe 4 courts in a tennis court, so there's been some of that, but the main thing to a project like this is having the right site. If it's a new site, the soil underneath is everything. It's just there, it becomes just like a road. It's only as good as what's underneath it. So if everything seems good, we always try to put in a curtain drain, at least on the high side. So, and we run the gravel up to the top, so we're picking up any surface water and not letting it, affect the subbase and the pavement. And in our website, we talk about there's only 3 things that can affect blacktop: water, or water. So if you can stop water from getting in there, you're going to have a much better job. And we find that we work for a lot of guys, and Buzz talked on it, that the contractor would prepare the sub base for us, and we get there and it wasn't right, or it had soft spots, or it's very tough to give a good job, and so we really stay away from that. And as we were talking before, the grade control is something that's really key to do the right job. And we use a laser grader, and we also want to make sure that we laser grade the bottom aggregate, the sub base. And this way you can put in, if it seems like a good solid project, we usually put in 6 inches of, well, in New York State we call item 4, which is a DOT aggregate, which has stone and stone dust, and it's very good material. But we laser grade that first to make sure we have the perfect grade, and then we install a stabilization fabric on top of that, and then we install the sub base, and then we'll do that in 2 lifts, 2 3-inch lifts, and come back in between. Too many times these guys, they don't get the sub base, the original grade right, and then you're putting in 4 inches of material here and 6 inches here, and it just doesn't compact right, and then you're just setting yourself up for failure. So it's a lot of times these other guys will just pay the laser grader to come in when they're got everything done, save money, and you're giving up quality. And so after we put in the sub base, either before or after, we sub out the fencing. So you need to think about fencing around the perimeter, and usually we'll have them put in the net posts, or we'll do the net posts ourselves. But you want to have them just build it so that the net posts are up, but no netting is up or fencing. So, and those are set to your grades, so, and you're controlling all that. And then, at least in New York State, in most of the courts that we do, we put a concrete, it's almost like a brick around the whole perimeter that we pave to. It just supports the edge, keeps it from, holding the integrity of the edge, give it a lot of strength. And then once all that is prepped, we're ready for blacktop. We build the courts with 4 inches of material. We use 2.5 inches of like a 3/4 inch binder. In New York State, we call it type 3. There you could use a super pave, but which would be probably a 19 millimeter. And then after we do that, we tack coat it, and then we will put 1.5 inches at top after compaction. These are all after compaction. It's 7F. It's a playground 1/4 inch mix, and when we pave that, we try to offset the original joints by 1 foot, so that some of the cracking on the white lines, whether it's the white lines or the way it's paved, or a combination of both, we're helping to eliminate some of that as far as the pavement. A lot of times these courts, especially on the older stuff where it's a redo, the access is tough. Like you've built this, court 20 years ago, and now they want you to redo it, but they put in 2 houses in between there, and landscape and stone wall. We've had where we had to, really do some crazy stuff to get material down there, to build roads, to get a paver down in there. And so that's something you really need to think about. You're going to be running this equipment in and tearing up, if it's not new construction, you're going to have to rebuild everything that you do. And then after that, you need to wait, 4 to 8 weeks, depending, before you can color it. And typically we'll put temporary lines on it so they could play right away. They're spending all this money. And then at least around here, coloring is anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, and the life of coloring could last, 4 to 8 years, 10 years. So it's something to think about, the maintenance of it and the cost of doing that. And I think that's kind of it. Just it's not a wham bam thank you ma'am. There's a lot. It's a well orchestrated job. So timing is everything. The sooner they can get it in, the sooner they can color it, and be able to use it.
That's exactly the kind of information that we hope you could share with us, Scott. I've got a couple of questions for you before
Sure.
kind of pull this together with takeaways, and because I'm the grade control to me is the scary part about this. Do you have your own survey capability, or do you hire somebody to come in and do that for you?
We do it. Actually, a good friend of mine has a drone that he works with GPS with, and he can shoot the grades and tell us what the cuts and fills are, and how much material. So, and then we own our own laser grader, which is a Bobcat with a grader in the front that's laser controlled. And then we also have a little bigger grader that's also laser controlled. So
So do you, when you're doing your asphalt paving, are you counting on getting your grade control with your by the time you're done with your base, or are you out there shooting elevations and doing real precise checks when you're doing your asphalt paving as well?
yes, so you're doing that, but we also have laser on our paver. So
Okay.
and if you have, you almost don't even need it, but if you have, you know, the sub base prepped right, you know, depending, there's a lot of different ways you can pitch the court, you know, left to right, from the net back both ways, you know, and then the pitch is very minimal. It's roughly an inch every 10 feet, which is less than 1%. And then the other thing I had meant to talk about is, so if you do have bird baths in there, very small, you know, when they color it, they can put a patch in there and get it out. The worst thing you'd want is any water laying there. In fact, we used to work for a tennis company, do all their paving. And then they had a guy come in to say, you know, why don't we do our paving in-house? Well, that lasted about 2 years. And then they come calling back to us saying, you know, we're done trying to pave. You know, when you don't do it every day, they do great work, but just, you know, they couldn't. In fact, their coloring guy was he had to do hardly if any patching before he colored it, and he's the one who was pushing to the boss, you know, hey, we need to get intercounty back because this isn't working. So you know, so it's the laser grader is key, and then we're also putting. I was saying about the block edge all the way around the perimeter. So there, you're paving to the top of it, so you have all your grades on all four sides. You know, then it's, but yeah, you're constantly checking it, and we're watching with a smart level as we're paving to make sure it's exactly what it's supposed to be. So
That's great. I appreciate that. And also another question I would have, because I'm visualizing, you know, what I would have to learn to do this type of work. Typically, I know it varies by job, but I mean, how many typical tons are you talking about putting down for the binder layer on a job like this, and for the surface on a job like this?
So typically, good question. It's about 120 tons of binder at 2.5 inches, and it's about 66 tons of top. Plus, we tack coat in between. On a good day, we'll do, it's just not like mainline paving. I mean, there's days we'll put down 2,500 tons on a roadway, but here to put that down in a day it's a tall order. If everything goes smoothly. So, and it's just slow, methodical, and precise work.
So you said 120 tons of 2.5 inch thick binder layer, and then 66 tons of surface. Was that right?
Yes.
At what thickness is the surface?
1.5 inches. These are all after compaction, and that's for the weight of our aggregate.
So do you use a warm mix additive then for that, or do you just go with what you got?
We go with what we have. Really, there is such minimal handwork if done properly. There's the start off pad and the finish pad on the other end, but typically there isn't even, because we'll pull. Really, you just have to build 2 start off pads. That's the only handwork you should really have. We'll pull a pass down from on the, you always want to pave on the 120 length. And if it's a pickleball court, you don't have that luxury, but, we'll pull down a start pad, and then we'll pull it down for a couple passes. And then we'll pull off of that, to pull our longer 120 poles, if I'm explaining that properly.
Okay, that's
and then
great.
when we get down to the other end of the 120, we'll pull that seam. We'll stop 10 feet before the end, and then we'll pull that side down. So those are the 2 pads that we have to, build in each course.
So and I'm just curious about the logistics of this, but when you call an asphalt producer and say, hey, I need 66 tons or 70 tons or 75 or whatever, 3 truckloads, whatever you order, how how difficult is that to coordinate? Is that a really odd mix for them to produce that you need to really be on the books ahead of time for?
Well, that's a great point. For the top course that we use, it's a 1/4 inch mix. It's a very fine mix. And so for that, that's not an everyday thing. So that might, depending on whether it's a batch plant or a drum plant. But if we're getting it from our drum plant supplier, they need as much notice as possible. I mean, we give notice to either or, but yeah, that's something that's coordinated ahead of time.
Okay, great. Well, that was those were all the questions that I had, and we're going to do a Q&A with our participants here at the end. And so, thank you for all those comments, Scott. And now I'm going to go back and try to pull all this together with some takeaways. So, Scott, if you can stay with us a few more minutes here, in case we have questions, we'd appreciate that very much. All right, so back to my screen. You should be able to see my screen. So to pull all this together we always try to come together at the end here with what are the practical takeaways for the discussion today. And I think you should have gotten this from Scott's comment. They take a lot of pride in what they do. They have a great reputation for the quality of the work that they do. You have to have planning, plant, and paving team that are sold out on what it is that you're doing. That's very, very important. If you don't have that, then you're going to have problems, and when you have problems, it's going to be difficult to have a profitable job, and then it's going to be difficult you don't need to have any hope to get repeat business if you don't do a good job the first time. Base preparation is really important. Design, construction, and grade, and it really can't emphasize enough the laser type control that you have out there. And if someone else is doing the base, I've got friends here in East Alabama that are pavers, and I see it happen to them frequently, where they get called out, hey, we're ready to pave, and then they get out there and there's some big problem with the base that makes it impossible to pave the surface to the tolerance that's required for the work. So it's always a good idea to go out there ahead of time, and there's probably not such a big deal on smaller projects like the courts, but I have seen some big blowouts with grade on big jobs where a lot of surveying is required, so they sort of get carried away with the GPS work, and they don't follow up with the laser checks and the laser controls. And so they have grade problems that they're unaware of because they're blind to the variability in the Z. And in other words, based on everything that I've read, I believe that this is still the case. If you're using RTK GPS to control a job, any job, sport court or conventional, you can get as close as you need to get for the X and the Y to know where you are essentially in a plan view on the job. But the elevation, as close as you can get on the elevation, just with really good GPS, is about the thickness of a golf ball. And so just imagine in a sport court application, a golf ball error in grade is unacceptable. So you got to have lasers out there to make sure that the grade is what it's supposed to be. Whether you're producing the mix or buying the mix, the way Intercounty orders and buys these mixes, you got to make sure that the mixes are sized for the use. They're not like, you wouldn't want to put a kind of a more rugged, stiffer super pave mix as a surface on a sport court. Scott mentioned that's what he called a playground mix, a 1/4 inch size mix. We would call that a sand mix, maybe a sand screening size mix. But something that you would typically use on a parking lot, or maybe even a little bit smaller. got to be right, the right mix for the right job. Got to have the right aggregates in it, and not too much wrap, and the right kind of binder grade. You can imagine if you've got just a handful of trucks out there, and you're doing this work over the course of the day. If you've got a mix that's got too much wrap in it, or if you've got the wrong kind of binder grade in it, you could lose workability very quickly and not be able to get this material down and get it compacted the way that it needs to be. Don't neglect quality, and that goes beyond just the grade control. The mix needs to be healthy. The right kind of binder content, the right gradation, the right voids, and you have to compact it. One of the nice things about capping these structures with what Scott described as a playground mix is those mixes compact easily, and they become impermeable at lower levels of density. So it's not like you gotta hit a perfect 94% density to make it impermeable like you would if it was a roadway. As long as you get good compactive effort and you seal the surface up, it's going to be relatively impermeable. But you do need to make sure that you do a good job and get it properly compacted. Again, the hyper focus on grade control to prevent the bird bass. Noting what Scott said with the coating subcontractor, good coating subcontractor can come. Essentially, they can level the bird bass with the coating material that they provide, as long as they're not too bad. But you can prevent those with the right kind of grade control effort. With cracking, you can saw and seal the cracking in order to kind of control it, and that's not something that we talked about in the presentation. But there are some really good standard practices that you can get to online. And essentially, with saw and seal, what you're saying is, I'm probably going to have a crack here over the long term, so I'm going to do a masonry saw cut, and I'm going to fill it up with a crack sealer. But before I do my final coating, and that way I'm gonna manage the crack and make sure that it doesn't materialize on the surface in a really kind of uncontrolled, ugly, irregular type of a way. And really, what all this is about is bidding and building profitable and successful projects that you don't just close out, but like Scott said, and Intercounty has the kind of reputation where they want to be the people that are known to do good work, so that they're asked to come in and do future work. So it's not just about bidding and building for profit. It's about doing that in a way where your customers want you to come back in, and it's easy to get more work in the future. So these are our email addresses. We always follow up with our emails, so that if anybody has any questions that they don't get to ask here before the end of the webinar, we welcome you to follow up with us. That's Travis, and then myself, and then Scott's email address. You can do a screen grab of that if you want to follow up with us at a later time. Before we get to Q&A, before I hand it back off to Travis, we always advertise the track conference. We're quickly approaching the track conference. It's May the 7th, 8th, and 9th. And if you've not ever experienced this before, it's a great implementation focused event, and you can register for the track conference using that QR code there. This is the last monthly webinar where we'll advertise it, because by the time we do the next webinar, the conference will have been passed. But if you want to learn not about sport courts and trails, but about paving good roadways, designing and building good roadways, the track conference is a really good place for you to be able to do that.
Buzz, I want to let people know that there's a virtual option for that too, if you're not able to come to Alabama in person.
That is great. Thank you for adding that, Travis. We also in these webinars we always plug the Travis's training in your pocket. So if you have and Scott, this is even for businesses like yours, when you hire somebody new, bring somebody new onto your team, and you want to kind of bring them up to speed with some really engaging, amusing, short training videos to kind of help them understand the basics of what we're doing. This is a great video series for that purpose. And engineers, we kind of lose our minds sometimes, and we want to be thorough, so we end up making 30-minute videos that no one can watch. And what I really like about the training in your pocket videos is they're short, they're entertaining, and they're engaging, and they're very, very practical for that purpose. If you need bigger and better training, Travis runs our training program, and you can send people here to NCAT for any number of training courses, or Travis can come to you, and the webpage for that is ncat.us. That you can also get to the test track from ncat.us if you want to learn more about the work that we do here at the NCAT pavement test track. And then finally, as I hand off to Travis for Q&A, the next webinar that we'll do is May the 16th, and we always do these the third Thursday of every month from 10 to 11 Central Time. And the next one is Practical Forensics for Asphalt Pavement, and that's one that I'm, again, another one I'm excited about because it's a real common sense, practical type of webinar. So having said all that, Travis, I'm gonna hand off to you in case we have any Q&A, or in case you have any questions that you'd like to ask.
We have both. So we do have a question from our good friend John Young out in Hawaii, who, by the way, is up before the sun to participate every month in this webinar. But Scott, I think I'd love to have some of your input on this. He says that in his experience, cracking always occurs where there's striping. Wondered if you have any solutions to prevent that type of cracking from occurring.
No, just as I said before, we'll offset each lift by a foot to help not add to that, because the seams usually end up on the cracks, on the lines when you pave the parking lot. So we will avoid wherever the lines are, and then when we come with the second lift, we either stay in a foot or over a foot, so those two lines don't have but that's that's all I can do, is make sure there's a good base, and and we typically don't have problems. I'm not saying we never have problems, but so that's what we do to help prevent it,
Okay.
to avoid seams on the lines and to overlap the passes.
Yeah, that sounds great, because those seams typically have a lower density anyway, which invites water in. And I really loved, I teach so often that my way of teaching is water is evil when it comes to pavements. And so I loved your water really fit a lot of what I teach as well there. So Buzz, do you have any recommendations for reducing the cracking at striping?
No, I did a little bit of research into that, and for the presentation I did at New Jersey, there's a standard drawing for a saw and seal that's supposed to help. And John, that might be something that your folks could try in Hawaii. But I don't. Again, my disadvantage here is I've never built and maintained one of these. So there is a recommended procedure, and it's kind of like sawing and sealing asphalt pavements on top of jointed concrete pavement. Yeah, and what you're saying is, I know I'm going to crack there, so I'm going to manage it, and I'm going to control it, and that might be something to try. But I wouldn't do that. I would do that as an experiment initially before I did it as a standard practice, just to see if there's a return on investment.
Sure. And I know that Utah DOT did a little bit of looking into cracking along with striping several years ago, but I don't think they made any conclusions or recommendations. They just basically quantified it. So, Scott, I'm really interested in the compaction process. We've talked a bunch about that. Buzz mentioned how important density is, and you several times said, these are compacted thicknesses. And I'm interested in what kind of compaction process or compaction system or train that you guys use on the sports courts to get the density that you like.
Well, typically we'll have on that job, because it's tight, a 1.5 ton roller and a 3 to 5 ton roller that both vibrate, past, that. And, we're on top of it, especially the binder right away. And then I also, love the fact that, we're using tack coat, even though it's too hot, if we're paving them both at the same time, we're putting a glue there, almost like a piece of plywood that just helps the tensile strength. I think it would be. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but and then we're doing that. But we do have to have compaction, and the biggest test of that is when we back trucks in to do the second lift. And that's why if the sub base isn't rock solid, you're not going to be able to pave both in the same day. And that's kind of, we have some other companies that will do the binder one day and come back and do the top the next day. Well, I kind of feel like that's kind of our competitive edge, is that we can do that. So I can't go into a court that doesn't have super sub base. And like I said, there's also times where guys have graded it, but they didn't have before they put the sub base down perfectly graded, and then it calls for different thicknesses of sub base, and then you're fighting it when you're paving it. Pay me now, pay me later.
Sure, that makes sense. Well, cool. Well, we're close to the end of the hour here. We don't have any other questions. Looks like Buzz has got something else he wants to share with us. So Buzz, go.
Very quickly, I pulled this up. This is some of the cracking that we really want to avoid on these types of facilities, and this is a court that's been sawed and sealed using this using this standard drawing. And so you go in and it's just like sawing and sealing with as I said, pavement, asphalt pavement over jointed concrete pavement. There's a saw cut, a very depth saw cut that you make with a bond breaker tape and a sealant material. So I just wanted to share that really quickly. Just in case.
If you go back to the picture before that, you can see that longitude joint and is not on the line.
It's the one that's between the two courts?
Right there?
No, go back another one. Yeah, there. There's no line there. And
right.
I would tend to believe that this is an older court, but this is how they paved it on one side of the fence post, and then they went on the other. And this is exactly what we try to avoid, because it's very typical to be able to pave, you got to stay inside. The fence post isn't in, but the foundation is, and you got to pave up to that. And
right.
So limits, so it kind of lays out where you should be paving. And, these are things that, we try to avoid, because then we got to fit inside of the center net anchor, so you're very tied to what you can do.
Right.
And that's why we try to keep things off the lines and stagger the joints.
That's great. That's a great observation and great feedback. We appreciate that very much, Scott. And thank you so much for agreeing on short notice to join us today. I think your insight was extremely helpful. And Travis, I think this will be a really good webinar to have in the library for people to reference in the future.
And we also have, I started pulling them up, but I kept getting distracted, but you'd have to dig through a lot. But we have some great pictures on Instagram, and we could use some more followers. We have like 60,000 followers. And, but we do have some laser grading and some tennis and sports courts on there.
Well, what's your Instagram handle, Scott?
Anyone wants to check it out? Well, one word, Inter-County Paving.
We'll look forward to taking a look at that. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, guys.
That sounds good. Thank you so much for joining us, Scott, from Inter-County Paving. And Buzz, always a pleasure to have you here. Again, please try and join us next month, forensics or practical forensics for asphalt paving. The registration is open for that at this time with the same QR code that Buzz shared with you. So given that, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.